You now, Beckenham Neighbourhood Association. Good morning. How are you, Peter? You haven't been well, have you?
Much better, thank you, and my wife's much better too. She had a hip replacement operation and she's doing fabulously.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Is this the mic?
Yes, it's all live. It's ready to go.
Thank you. No. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been involved in consultations about City Council plans for something like 20 years, and your introduction came across as refreshingly different from the usual piece of well-crafted bureaucratic boilerplate. And we hope
well, maybe that's because I wrote it myself.
And we hope that the very positive note you struck and your appeal for dialogue and for meaningful partnership will meet with a positive response. As we indicated in our original submission, we see the serious conversation that you've sought as something that will need to be ongoing and not just limited to annual or long-term plan consultations. We're all in this together is a very excellent theme, but if it's to have real meaning, then we all need to keep in more frequent touch by some means or other. I'll have a bit more to say about that later. On finance, we hope that now that the government's made good on its election campaign promises of a $300 million capital fund for Christchurch, the degree of constraint will have been eased to some extent, though obviously the need for a balancing act will continue. We would like to reiterate our broad support for the kind of balance that the Council has sought to strike in the plan. That being said, we'd like to clarify our position as far as the proposed spending on attracting events to Christchurch is concerned. We're not categorically opposed to the Council seeking to do this, which may have been an impression you got from our original submission, but we would urge particular caution against what may be perceived as opportunistic impulse buying or as a bid to distract public attention from critical civic issues. It's an area where the sums involved may be relatively small, but the optical impact can be huge. And you may recall that it was the purchase of Ellerslie Flower Show that earned for your predecessor the rather derisive nickname Sideshow Bob. As regards the idea of a future fuel tax, we would observe that fuel prices are and will foreseeably remain a particularly sensitive issue. So when the Council is looking for a more creative approach to sources of finance, it will be worth giving the Auckland experience with fuel tax very careful study to see what, if any, unforeseen problems and unintended consequences may eventuate. Turning to water, in our Beckenham suburb, we have 5 overflow outlets in our loop of the Heathcote River, and our neighbourhood is very susceptible to flooding and to the polluting effects of emergency overflows in heavy rainfall events. We want to emphasise the reservations we have regarding the idea of a shift from incidence-based to effects-based emergency overflow consent conditions, which was raised in discussions last year. Discounting clearly measurable overflow incidents as a basis for consent conditions in favour of more debatable ecological considerations can look like a device to render prosecution for consent infringement more problematical and in effect enable the Council to get away with more pollution than it would otherwise be able to. I'm not saying that's the main motive for it, but it seems like part of it. For residents whose homes are threatened with inundation by polluted water at times of flooding, the frequency of overflows is of most immediate concern, rather than more general and comparatively remote considerations of environmental impact. So we would urge the Council to stick with incidence-based criteria as the principal yardstick for any future applications for overflow consent. We very much welcomed your commitment to make chlorination of our hitherto pristine water supply temporary, but we do hope that the degree of chlorination can be improved to achieve more palatable results. We are concerned that the chlorination, however temporary, may be seized on politically by those who have an interest in doing so as a reason, grounds for a more lax enforcement of agricultural pollution restrictions. Turning to parks and heritage, we're still mystified as to why a certain amount of funding has been put in for the Mid-Heathcote Linear Park Master Plan for the next few years, but nothing beyond 2020 to 21, and we'd like to know what's behind that. We're sorry that the Council is proposing to defer repair of the Canterbury Provincial Council buildings for 10 years, but we can understand why that is. In the meantime, please make sure that the fabric of those buildings is properly protected, because we've seen a dreadful example of what happens to a building if it's not properly protected in the cathedral. We're supportive of the proposed expenditure on repairs and improvements to the roading network, but again, we would like to be confident that road repairs are real road repairs and address any issues in the road bed and aren't just sort of superficial tarmac sticking plasters. We are very supportive of the Council's encouragement for use of public transport and cycling, and as we've said to ECAN already, we think public transport will be better coordinated if it were the sole responsibility of the City Council. We're more confident in the City Council's readiness to be responsive to to community needs than we are in that of ECAN. Again, looking at the South Christchurch Library Service Centre complex, we're happy to, well, we accept the proposal to defer expenditure on repairs for a few more years, but again, we would hope that the Council will monitor the state of the building regularly and frequently and be ready to intervene if anything happens that requires intervention. Almost lastly, we're pleased to see the stated aim of achieving improvement in participation in democratic processes, and also the goal of active participation in civic life, which was part of the community outcomes part of the plan. We see that as expressing a goal that extends beyond the confines of formal democratic processes, and it links back to what you said in your introduction about conversation with residents and dialogue. The figures given in the LTP suggest that quite a lot more needs to be done in this whole area, and it can happen at the grassroots as well. And in that regard, we'd like to single out the efforts of our Spraden Cashmere Community Board and of its predecessor, the Spraden Heathcote Community Board. Thanks to very much to councillors Clearwater and Scandrett, which frequently puts on seminars and workshops and forums and invites local residents to participate in discussing community and civic issues. More broadly, we hope that when the time comes, the City Council will play a part in determining the composition of the future democratic environment Canterbury, if the pre-2010 procedures for determining that are followed. In conclusion, we're very welcoming of the spirit of dialogue and partnership that you expressed in your introduction. It seems to us to strike a new note in the relationship between Council and Christchurch residents. We welcome your invitation to a serious conversation about what the Council prioritises, and we stand ready to do our bit as a participant and partner in what we trust will be an ongoing dialogue. And the fresh approach shown by the new Rebuild Minister further encourages us in the expectation that Council and Government will work together in a more harmonious and fruitful partnership than was possible under the previous regime. So broadly, we think the draft LTP strikes a reasonable balance as a basis for addressing the many challenges that lie ahead. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Turn my thing off. Thank you very much for your submission and for the time that you've taken on behalf of the Beckenham Neighbourhood Association. So thank you very much for presenting to us today. Thank you.